A big announcement this week is that 230 miles of smart wall is coming to the southern border, and more than half of that is coming right here to Texas.
Texas and Washington went to war, not with bullets, but with razor wire, court orders, and National Guard troops. Governor Greg Abbott openly defied the Supreme Court, blocked federal agents from the border, and sparked a constitutional crisis that had 25 Republican governors rallying behind him. What started as a policy dispute became the most explosive federal-state confrontation in decades, when Texas took on the federal government. Since last year, America has been watching one of the most dramatic confrontations between a state and the federal government since the Civil Rights era. At the center of it all was Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a man who had decided that if Washington wouldn't secure the border, he would do it himself. Federal authority be damned. To understand this clash, you need to go back to March 2021, when Governor Abbott launched Operation Lone Star. This wasn't just another border security initiative. It was a declaration that Texas would operate its own parallel immigration enforcement system. Abbott deployed thousands of National Guard troops, ordered the installation of miles upon miles of razor wire, and made a decision that would ultimately bring him into direct conflict with the Biden administration. He placed floating barriers in the Rio Grande River itself.
If those look familiar, it's because Texas installed similar waterborne barriers in the Rio Grande, and this is now becoming a whole federal protocol. So this entire system altogether is what's known as the Smart Wall.
But the real confrontation came in January 2024. In Eagle Pass, Texas, along a 2.5-mile stretch of the border, something unprecedented happened. Texas National Guard forces physically blocked U.S. Border Patrol agents from accessing the border. Federal agents, whose job it is to process migrants and respond to emergencies, were denied entry by state troops. This wasn't a bureaucratic disagreement. This was a standoff. The federal government sued Texas. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where in a narrow 5-4 decision, the justices ruled in favor of the Biden administration. The ruling was clear. Border Patrol had the authority to cut Texas's razor wire if necessary to perform their duties. Governor Abbott's response? It's defiance. He didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down, announcing that Texas would install even more barriers. Abbott invoked language that hadn't been used in American politics for generations, claiming Texas was defending itself against an invasion under constitutional authority.
The goal of Senate Bill 4 is to stop the tidal wave of illegal entry into Texas.
The political fallout was immediate and divided America along predictable lines. 25 Republican governors issued a joint statement backing Abbott's position. They argued that the federal government had failed in its fundamental duty to secure the nation's borders and that states had every right to step in. The Shelby Park standoff in Eagle Pass became ground zero for this conflict. Texas National Guard seized control of the park, blocking federal access entirely. Border Patrol couldn't respond to emergencies. The consequences were tragic. Migrant drownings occurred while federal agents were prevented from reaching them. The Biden administration accused Texas of interfering with federal immigration enforcement. Abbott accused federal agents of actually facilitating illegal entries by dismantling state barriers.
A state of emergency at the Texas border. The mayor of El Paso making the declaration late Saturday.
There were viral videos showing federal agents using forklifts to lift or remove barriers that Texas had installed. Abbott called it proof that Washington was working against border security. The Biden administration called Texas's actions unconstitutional interference. This wasn't just about border policy anymore. This was about the fundamental question of federalism in America. When push comes to shove, who has the final say? The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says federal law preempts conflicting state actions. But Abbott was testing that principle in the most aggressive way possible. The legal battles multiplied. The Department of Justice challenged Senate Bill 4, a Texas law that made illegal entry a state crime and gave state police authority to arrest and deport migrants, powers that have traditionally belonged exclusively to federal authorities. Federal courts, including the Supreme Court, issued stays blocking enforcement. The human cost extended beyond migrants. High-speed pursuits conducted under Operation Lone Star resulted in 74 deaths, including 7 bystanders and 189 injuries. Among the National Guard troops deployed to the border, there were at least 4 suicides in 2021 alone. A 2022 survey revealed that 30% of Guard members expressed frustration with the mission, citing pay delays and poor conditions. Yet by late 2024, Texas was claiming victory. The state reported an 87% drop in illegal crossings. Abbott and his supporters pointed to Operation Lone Star as proof that aggressive state action worked. Critics countered that much of the decline was actually due to Mexican enforcement efforts encouraged by U.S. diplomatic pressure, not Texas's razor wire. Operation Lone Star has cost Texas over $11.2 billion. That's billion with a B. Critics, including Texas Democrats, argued the expenditures lacked clear metrics for success and diverted funds from other pressing state needs like education and infrastructure. As 2024 closed and the presidential election approached, the clash between Texas and Washington represented more than a policy dispute. It represented a fundamental divide over executive power, states' rights, and the role of the federal government in American life. The stage was set for a dramatic shift, from confrontation to collaboration. January 20th, 2025, changed everything. When Donald Trump took the oath of office for his second term, the dynamic between Texas and Washington transformed overnight. The adversaries became allies. The clash became collaboration. On his very first day in office, Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border. He used language that echoed Abbott's own rhetoric, citing an invasion by cartels, gangs, terrorists, traffickers, and narcotics. The proclamation revoked Biden-era terminations and invoked military authorities that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Trump's plans were aggressive: deployment of armed forces, ready reserve, and National Guard units to support the Department of Homeland Security, immediate construction of additional physical barriers, counter-drone measures waiving FAA and FCC regulations within 5 miles of the border, and updated use-of-force policies. The language in his proclamation was stark. Our southern border is overrun. This assault on the American people represents a grave threat to our nation. For Abbott, this was vindication. Everything he had fought for, the barriers, the military presence, the aggressive enforcement, was now federal policy. In January 2025, Abbott issued an executive order directing Texas state agencies to assist federal immigration officers with investigations and deportations. The governor who had blocked federal agents was now ordering state agencies to work hand-in-hand with them. The numbers Abbott highlighted were impressive: 530,800 apprehensions under Operation Lone Star, 622 million fentanyl doses seized, an 87% drop in crossings. He requested $11.1 billion in federal reimbursement for Texas's expenditures, and with Republicans controlling Washington, that money might actually come. The federal government began adopting Texas's playbook. Remember those floating buoys that sparked federal lawsuits? The federal government announced it would install similar waterborne barriers as part of the new Smart Wall system. The $46 billion spending package allocated $4.5 billion for 230 miles of smart wall technology, steel barriers, roads, lights, cameras, sensors, and those controversial floating barriers. Texas was getting the lion's share. More than $2.6 billion was earmarked for the state. The Del Rio sector, including Eagle Pass, the very site of the federal-state standoff, would receive about 22 miles of new wall and 40 miles of waterborne barriers. By June 2025, the collaboration had progressed to the point where Texas lawmakers actually cut Operation Lone Star funding by about $1 billion for the next biennium. Not because they were abandoning border security, but because the federal government was finally doing the job Texas had tried to do alone. Abbott praised this as Washington finally fulfilling its obligation. The partnership extended beyond infrastructure. Texas sent 400 soldiers to the Rio Grande Valley in January 2025 to support federal efforts. National Guard members from other states began flowing into Texas, 60 from Oregon, 200 from New York, bringing Humvees equipped with surveillance technology. The Oregon group would work alongside military police. The New York contingent would be headquartered in Laredo for a 14-month deployment.
You might remember last week we told you that members of the Texas National Guard were heading to Chicago to help in those federal immigration efforts. The governor says that they're going to be safeguarding ICE and other federal officials. Well, now 60 National Guards members from Oregon are now coming to Texas, and about 200 guardsmen from the state of New York are also coming to the border.
Trump's December 2025 speech at the White House during the Mexican Border Defense Medal presentation painted a picture of total success. He claimed the border had been secure for 7 months with 0 illegal entries in the last 8 months, over 13,000 military patrols and 25,000 personnel, fentanyl inflows down 50%, cartels designated as enemies of the United States and foreign terrorist organizations. Catch and release ended. The results on the ground seemed to back up the rhetoric. Border crossings fell to historic lows, the lowest in 55 years according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In places like El Paso, crossings were at near 50-year lows. The transformation was visible on the ground.
Since Donald Trump has become president, we don't see illegal crossings.
In Starr County, Texas, a community where cultures blend and family roots run deep along the border, the change was dramatic. Mayor Jamie Escobar of Roma described the shift from Biden to Trump as night and day. Where hundreds of people once crossed on rafts near his city, the traffic had stopped.
Tell me what used to happen right here.
Well, yes, that casually they'd have like a little raft come across the river.
Escobar says sometimes there would be hundreds of people. Families traveling together would mostly surrender to Border Patrol and start the asylum-seeking process, while others, he said, would make a run for it.
Since Donald Trump has become president, we haven't seen the same type of situations. We don't see illegal crossings.
The enforcement extended beyond the border itself. DPS officers began assisting ICE in arresting and deporting undocumented immigrants, with over 3,000 arrests statewide in 2025. Joint operations targeted cartels, including the capture of a Sinaloa boss in November, and gangs like Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan criminal organization that had become a major concern. New legislation formalized the collaboration. In July 2025, Abbott signed Senate Bill 8, creating a Homeland Security Division within DPS, and Senate Bill 36, enhancing federal coordination. Texas had gone from fighting Washington in court to embedding its operations within the federal immigration enforcement apparatus. But collaboration doesn't mean the controversy ended. The same aggressive tactics that made Operation Lone Star effective also made it divisive. The consequences. For all the political drama, the border crisis is fundamentally about real people and real consequences. The shift from confrontation to collaboration has rippled through Texas's economy, transformed communities, and left lasting marks on families, both American and immigrant. Here's an inconvenient truth that often gets lost in the political debate. Immigrants, including undocumented ones, have been a net positive for Texas's economy. They make up 23% of the state's workforce, 3.7 million people. They generate $192 billion in annual personal income, representing nearly 1 in 5 spending power dollars in the state. Undocumented and temporarily protected workers alone contribute over $10 billion in taxes annually. During the migrant influx from 2021 to 2024, at least 550,000 extra immigrants arrived in Texas. That surge helped fuel the post-pandemic recovery, with Texas outpacing national job growth at over 2% annually. Businesses became increasingly dependent on foreign-born workers. 25% of Texas companies reported relying on workers from outside the U.S. in 2024, up from just 15% the year before. Then came the crackdowns. By 2025, job growth in Texas had slowed to 1.2% year to date, the lowest since the pandemic. About 20% of Texas businesses report hiring and retention difficulties due to immigration policies. Construction values dropped 26% from January 2025 peaks. In hospitality and energy sectors, including the crucial Permian Basin, deportations risk business closures and lost tax revenue. Agriculture may be the hardest hit sector. Undocumented immigrants comprise about 50% of Texas's agricultural workforce. These are the people doing the labor-intensive work that legal workers often refuse, picking fruits and vegetables in brutal conditions. Mass removals threaten shortages that could lead to reduced output, higher food prices, and shifts to less labor-intensive crops. The Dallas Fed estimates that without increased immigration, U.S. GDP growth could slow significantly because the native-born workforce simply can't offset demographic challenges like an aging population. Projections suggest mass deportations could reduce U.S. GDP by 2.6% to 6.2% over a decade, with Texas facing potential employment losses of 865,000 jobs, a 5.8% decline. In Starr County, one of the poorest communities in America with a median household income of just $38,000 a year, the economic reality is complex. The local economy hasn't improved the way many hoped. Becky Garza, who runs the Texas Cafe in Starr County, a business her grandfather opened in 1939, describes the situation bluntly. Prices fluctuate wildly, customers are choosing to stay home, and she's had to cut hours. The economy itself is just not helping us any at all. The security situation for enforcement agents has become genuinely dangerous. Federal officials warn of credible threats against Border Patrol and ICE agents. Mexican cartels working with domestic groups have allegedly placed bounties on agents. Gang members in Chicago have acted as spotters, watching from rooftops, using radios to track agent movements, and in some cases helping coordinate ambushes. Intelligence reports describe a tiered bounty system paying thousands of dollars for information about agents, kidnappings, and, in extreme cases, assassinations of high-ranking officials. DHS has confirmed increased ambushes and disruptions during operations, particularly in Chicago. The ripple effects extend beyond Texas. Mexico has been forced to ramp up internal enforcement, contributing to the dramatic drop in U.S. border apprehensions, but straining Mexico's own resources for repatriations and shelters. Texas's barriers and enforcement have diverted migrants to more dangerous routes, increasing deaths and smuggling risks. Neighboring U.S. states have absorbed spillover effects. The extension of crackdowns to El Paso pushed migrants into New Mexico's remote deserts, where 299 human remains were reported in the El Paso sector from January 2023 to August 2024, the highest along the entire southern border. Looking ahead, the federal-state partnership shows no signs of weakening. Abbott's November 2025 posts show him serving Thanksgiving meals to Guard members alongside Border SAR Tom Homan and other governors, celebrating what he calls the lowest immigration levels on record. The Texas legislature has formalized its approach with new laws creating a Homeland Security Division within DPS and enhancing federal coordination. Plans continue for the Smart Wall expansion, with construction in the Laredo sector potentially beginning next year. Yet the underlying tensions haven't disappeared, they've just shifted. Progressive groups continue highlighting humanitarian concerns with enforcement tactics. Business leaders warn about labor shortages. Within Republican circles, potential gubernatorial challenger Doc Pete Chambers has criticized Abbott for allegedly weak rules of engagement during Operation Lone Star, claiming troops were ordered to retreat if fired upon from Mexico. The communities along the border remain divided. In Starr County, Mayor Escobar says he's pro-immigration but believes the previous system wasn't working. He captures the complexity. We're families of immigrants, and we're proud to say that, but we also believe that we have to have law and order.
We're families of immigrants, and we're proud to say that, but we also believe that we have to have law and order.
The question that remains unanswered is whether the current approach is sustainable. The $11 billion Texas spent on Operation Lone Star represents a massive investment. Even with federal reimbursement and reduced state spending, the costs, financial, economic, and human, continue to accumulate. What started as a clash between a governor and a president became a redefinition of how America enforces its borders. Greg Abbott's defiance of federal authority in 2024 has evolved into partnership in 2025. The razor wire that sparked Supreme Court battles is now federal policy. The floating barriers that drew lawsuits are being installed by the government that once tried to stop them. But beneath the policy victories and political alliances, real people continue to navigate the consequences. Business owners cutting hours, families stretching grocery budgets, workers living in fear of deportation, agents facing threats to their lives, and communities trying to balance security with humanity. The Texas federal border clash may be over, but its effects will shape immigration policy, state-federal relations, and border communities for years to come. 1 year after the most divisive election in decades, Starr County remains deeply divided, a microcosm of an America still wrestling with fundamental questions about who we are and who belongs. The technology being deployed represents a new era in border security. The smart wall isn't just concrete and steel, it's an integrated surveillance system designed to detect movement before anyone even reaches the physical barrier. Cameras with night vision, ground sensors that detect footsteps, and radar systems create an electronic perimeter extending miles from the actual border. Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland of Terrell County believes this early detection capability could transform border enforcement. While his sector isn't included in the current round of funding, he sees the writing on the wall, literally. As other sectors become more secure, migrant traffic will shift, and resources will follow.
I truly believe that once they know that other areas are more secure, this will be the funneling point. But at that point, I do believe that Border Patrol will begin to funnel more funding and technology, and most importantly, manpower.
For the residents of border communities, the political battles in Washington and Austin often feel distant from their daily realities. They navigate a world where security concerns intersect with economic anxiety, where family heritage meets federal policy, and where the promise of America confronts the challenges of enforcement. Diana Basella and her husband have resorted to grocery shopping once every 2 months, buying only necessities, milk, eggs, the bare essentials. Meat has become a luxury they can rarely afford. For her, the immigration debate is secondary to the immediate struggle of putting food on the table.
We buy the necessities, the milk, the eggs, and stuff like that. We hardly buy meat.
Mindy Garza, a retired local teacher, worries about something beyond economics, the way enforcement has changed the atmosphere in her community. The fear isn't just among undocumented immigrants. It extends to U.S. citizens who happen to look a certain way.
The way ICE is treating, Hispanic people, just because they look a certain way, they think you weren't born and raised in the U.S. and they're being attacked.
The debate over immigration technology versus personnel continues to simmer beneath the surface. Democratic challenger Andrew White argues that smart technology should replace the human presence, that there's a more efficient, less divisive approach to border security waiting to be implemented. What remains to be seen is whether the current collaboration between Texas and Washington represents a lasting realignment or simply a pause in the constitutional struggle over border enforcement authority. If priorities diverge, if a future administration takes a different approach, the legal framework established during the 2024 clashes could be tested again. For now, the border is quieter than it's been in decades. The confrontation has given way to coordination. But the fundamental tensions between federal authority and states' rights, between security and humanity, between economic necessity and enforcement priorities, remain unresolved, waiting just beneath the surface. What do you think the long-term consequences of this federal-state partnership will be? Let us know your thoughts.